then, let's jump into it. Do you remember what exactly triggered you to start production? Like, what was this specific situation?
I've tried to remember before. I don't know if I have a specific memory, but I was in, I think, 9th grade, just starting high school, and I heard The Cold Vein by Cannibal Ox, and then I heard there were a couple of albums that kind of were so different from everything else that I was hearing at the time. That it kind of made me feel like you could make a lot of stuff. Before that, I was kind of only hearing music on the radio when I was in middle school and things like that. And then I heard a few albums that kind of showed me that there was different kinds of music out there and that people were making things that were weird and kind of unique in a way that made me want to figure out how they were doing it. And so it was before anybody knew that like Ninth Wonder used Fruity Loops or anything like that. So it was
yeah, that's what I use. I mean, no secret.
It was very bare bones. I think I started out with Cool Edit Pro, and I was just like copying and pasting waveforms together. And I didn't really know anyone else that was doing it, and there wasn't that much online at the time. There weren't like YouTube tutorials yet. And so the first few things that I did were like taking pieces of movies and songs that I liked and like splicing them together. And then, I had a bunch of friends that rapped, so they would make songs over them. And then eventually I was exposed to other people doing the same thing, and I realized how bad I was. And I'm very motivated by competition and getting better and learning how to do things that I don't know how to do. So it's kind of all snowballed from there.
Mm-hmm. And you said Cool Edit Pro is the first DAW.
Yeah. Wow. Pirated copy of Cool Edit Pro and like Windows Sound Recorder. There was a way that you could copy and paste sound in there so you could loop things like on Windows XP or something.
And the life you lead in many ways.
And how did you transition to gear from Cool Edit?
So I had a summer job working for the Forest Service, digging hiking trails. And so I saved up a bunch of money, and at the time, I thought, like, if you're going to make beats, you need to have an MPC. So I saved up for a summer, and then I was going to try and buy a 2000 XL. And I tried to buy it on eBay, and I didn't know anything about what I was doing, and I got scammed, and I ended up with like I ended up with this broken 2000 Classic behind me. And it had a bunch of broken buttons and some like OS stuff that it would crash all the time. And so then I didn't buy any more gear for like 10 years after that. Except for the S900 I bought for like $100, and I didn't know what it did, and I didn't do anything with it for a long time. So those are the two pieces I bought in the very beginning. And then I used the 2000 as a MIDI controller for Reason for a long time, but I didn't really buy any other actual hardware until I was in my mid-20s or something like that, and had a little bit more money to spend on things. But
so you went from this Cool Edit, I guess, to Reason, basically with the Excel in between.
I never had an Excel. I just got the 2000 Classic.
The 2000 Classic.
Yeah, so I tried to use it a little bit, but it would crash often enough, and I would lose things, and I just didn't really dig into it far enough to fully understand the workflow. So I wouldn't say I was really even making beats on it for a long time. So I was using Cool Edit Pro, and then I think there was a big thing when everybody figured out that Ninth Wonder was using Fruity Loops. So then I had a pirated copy of Fruity Loops for a while, and then I took a class at a recording studio in some point in high school, and they had copies of Reason. So then I started using Reason for a while, and that was kind of my introduction to being able to understand little like basics of synthesis stuff and some more sound designy stuff. And then when I went back to hardware stuff later, I kind of had a little bit better. Reason gives you a really nice visual example of what you're doing when you're routing cables in the back, or at least it did back when I was using it. And so I had a little bit of an understanding how things physically would work when I started buying gear. And then eventually I bought an MPC 1000 and some other things like that later on down the line. So. Yeah.
No, it obviously got out of control at some point.
It's definitely out of control. Well, I would say I've a little bit under control this year, but it has been out of control for periods for sure. I have a few things I need to post and sell right now, but
now I think I counted about 12 samplers in your shots.
Yeah. Yeah, but they all do something different, you gotta rationalize. Yeah, I think I have 5 or 6 SPs and a few MPCs right now. The thing I've been doing lately is like learning how to fix up and restore, like at a very basic level. So I have an XL that I'm fixing up and trying to get fully working again, and then I have a 2500 I need to sell because replace the parts that were broken and haven't been using it enough. So now I need to sell it to somebody. But yeah.
You mentioned they do different things. Can you expand on that? Like, do they have a specific job, each one of those, or?
Blessed with this curse, so I curse when I bless.
So let me preface this by saying, I don't think any hardware actually makes your music any better. And I think, in fact, when you buy new pieces, it kind of sets you back for a while because you have to learn how to use the new thing. And anytime I add something new into my workflow, my music is worse for at least a few weeks until I learn how to use it. But I am really interested in my creative process and my workflow, and you can get a lot of really interesting results using different limited pieces of gear. So for example, all of the SPs have limitations in slightly different ways, and a few of them have unique features, and other ones have unique sounds. And so, mixing and matching and trying out different things, I think can be really valuable in terms of putting yourself in different scenarios to be creative and finding solutions to different kinds of limitation problems and things like that. I can't remember what the question was.
Check it out.
Whether these like the limitation I take is the main job that they have in like what is common among those things. Do you still use pretty much old pieces for different tasks or jobs?
Yeah, I kind of. So the two that at least for the last couple of years, I used the 303 and the new SP basically all the time at sort of the beginnings and end of my chain, and then I'll slot other things in depending on what I'm feeling like. So lately I've been making a bunch of beats on Koala, but before that I was doing a bunch of XL stuff on my XL that only has 6 working pads. And then before that I was doing some Octatrack stuff and I just kind of will, like maybe a week at a time, I'll use one piece and then get annoyed at it or inspired by something else and swap it out. It's a very inefficient way to work, but it's a lot of fun.
Speaking of efficiency, that doesn't seem to be much of a concern when you work with the older pieces, at least. Is it then an inspirational thing?
I'm kind of chasing the feeling, that you get when you. I was just talking to somebody about this. That I try and make music. I try and make a beat every morning, or at least work on something. And I have a a 4 and a 6-year-old, so the only time that my house is quiet is if I get up really early in the morning. And the days when you get up and you make something that you really like, you feel great. And the days when I get up and it doesn't work, and whatever I had in my head isn't coming out, it's pretty. I feel pretty bad about myself until I can get back on the horse and do something else again. So, yeah, sometimes it's inspiration. Sometimes there's definitely some frustration with the hardware stuff.
What do you do to kind of switch this up? Do you switch boxes that day, or how do you go about this?
Yeah, the thing I try and do is I will work on like all the time. I'll get really excited about like organizing a bunch of drum samples, or like I need to go through and find a bunch of like little effects from records that I can use as drops. And I'll work on something that's like peripheral to making music, but it's not another beat. Because I feel like usually when I force myself to just try and make another beat, it doesn't go as well. So I'll organize, or I'll chop up samples for later, or go look for drums or whatever, that kind of stuff.
Beyond the obvious reasons I enjoy vinyl.
I take it you mostly use drums you find on vinyl, therefore. Is it like, what do you...
I feel like it's a mixture. My snares and hats are more vinyl. I am less able to get kick sounds that I like without a ton of processing from at least records. And so I cheat and I use other people's kicks a lot of the time, or at least layer other people's kicks under, vinyl kicks. But, I feel like, you can find a lot of clean snares and hats on records, and the processing, I think, is a little bit simpler for me to get the sound that I want, at least, out of them. And I think that's one of the things that's really I am very happy with in my creative process at this point, is that I feel like I can recognize stuff that I made based on the sounds that I use, and I feel like it has a distinct sound because I'm working with material that I created myself, or at least that I processed myself. And I do have way too many drum kits, just like everybody else. So I'm not going to say I never use other people's drums, but try and use my own as much as I can.
But not lucky minds, nor treasure.
Now that XL with 6 working pads, I remember you mentioned getting it. Is it like, what job does it has currently?
Right now it sits next to my SP, and I look at it. I've been trying, I really I like the way it sounds, so I've been sampling things into it and back out of it quite a bit. And I've made a few beats on it, but yeah, like it's the bottom L of pads works, and the other ones, I think I messed up the pad sensor, so I need to replace that. So it's fairly limiting in that way. But it's it's an interesting limitation. You only get a few sounds, and you got to figure out what to do with them. So
for sure, not a lot of chops.
Sure. No. But I mean, if you're making a beat on an SP on a 303, you get 8 pads, and it takes 10 seconds to do anything with those samples. So you got to be very deliberate and efficient, which is not something I'm great at. So good exercises, I think.
Oh, so you use that as an exercise as well to train yourself to be more deliberate with things?
I try. Yeah, I think maybe I rationalize it that way. In my head, I'm like, I'm going to sit down with the 303. I'm going to make an incredible beat, and then, it's more challenging than that. It's much more challenging to use than even the Mark II or any newer SPs or whatever. Just because with the older storage solutions, I think that's the biggest hurdle for a lot of the older samplers is just slow storage and small storage. And if it takes you 10 seconds to delete a sample, it really takes you out of the flow a little bit. And that's one of the things that's so nice about even all the 404s, even the original 404, these things just move so quickly compared to a lot of stuff. So, and actually, I think, in a vacuum, the 505 would be one of my favorite SPs because it's got It's got like some 303 style. It's a little bit different, but it's got 303 style effects. It's got a little bit more of an in-depth sequencer on it than most of the other SPs. And it has a multi-part system, so you can basically have 4 tracks in the sequencer, which would be incredible for like tracking beats out of an SP, which is very challenging to do on a lot of the other ones. But it has smart media cards, and it also is even slower than the 303 in some ways. So it just takes forever to do anything, and kind of, knocks you out of your flow state completely doing that.
That's an interesting distinction. Do you have something like that for each SP in terms of like this is what I love about this SP specifically? Because you got all of them.
I don't have a 202. Someday, if I find a really cheap one, I'll buy a 202. Well, the 303 sounds the best in my opinion. The vinyl sim, obviously, and the MFX 12 compression is really nice. I think because it like adds like kind of a white noise or a unique noise to the sound. So sound-wise, 303. I think if I was going to choose one to only have one SP, I would choose the OG 404 because it's a nice middle of sound and convenience. But it has some major drawbacks, and you can't copy samples, and I don't think you can copy patterns without doing a weird workaround where you like back it up to the card and it takes forever. So that is a major drawback. But it sounds amazing. I guess I talked about the 505. The 555 has a cool like loop capture thing, which is like resampling, but you can resample in specific lengths. So you can basically live loop kind of, but you get perfect loops every time, which is really cool and useful. And it also has effects presets, which a lot of them don't. The newer one does now, but that one you can save effects presets to pads, which is really cool. If you're playing live, you hit a pad and play a little bit of a reverb effect or something like that. I really didn't want to like the Mark II, but it's so damn useful that with the skip back sample, the reason I didn't want to like it, number one, is I'm 35 years old and I don't like new stuff anymore. I guess that's how it works when you get older. But also, the pads feel a little bit different. To me, the sound, and I don't know if I could actually tell in a vacuum, but the sound doesn't feel quite the same. There's more menus, so I didn't really want to like it. But the skip back sampling, I think it's basically the best scratch pad for saving samples, for grabbing samples from different things and saving them. And then it's really good all around. So I like it more than I thought I would. And I don't know about the 404A and SX. They're kind of solid all around, but they don't have as much of unique things as the others, unless I'm forgetting.
What is your sampling process? Do you sit down for a day and grab stuff, or?
Yeah, I try and separate that part out from the actual beat making, because I find if I sit down to make a beat and I have to spend a long time finding a good sample, either I get bored and do something else, or I try and make it happen with a sample that it might be good, or it might not work out for what I'm going for. I think one thing that I've learned, I think when you are kind of developing your sound, it's really useful to try and sample a whole lot of different stuff, and sometimes you come up with amazing things doing that, and I still do that sometimes. But I also think as you figure out what works well for you, you can be a little bit more selective over the samples that you try and flip, or the ways that you try and work, and you kind of get more consistent results that way. So I find if I have separate sessions where I kind of sit down and either go through records or look for stuff, goes through like archive.org, or obviously YouTube, or different sites online, and just collect a bunch of samples into a bank on the SP, and then I'll come back, when I want to make a beat and go through those and use. The other thing that's really nice about that is you can use multiple samples, so you don't have to go looking. Like if you want a bass line and you don't have bass in your sample, you don't have to go looking for bass to chop up. So it's nice to be able to combine multiple samples that way. And you can also move on really quick and make a bunch of beats really quick, and the ones that, finish up the ones that are working and scrap the other ones. So I would say the one drawback that I don't do well is I don't label my samples. And when you fill up an SP with random samples, I have no idea what any of them are. So that's probably not ideal.
Totally fine in my books.
Don't tell anyone.
But is it like you fill up one SP, or do you collect your samples across several machines to have, like, do you separate it like that?
I collect, I usually just collect in the Mark II, except like little vocal drops and little effects. I have a 404A that I put those kinds of samples in. And that way I just know they're always there. But it's so easy on the Mark II to just save them into one of the projects, fill up all the banks, and then when your projects are full, you can export them all, or you can back it up to the disk or whatever. But excuse me. Yeah, it's so convenient to work that way. Do
you upload them after that to like a repo of samples, or do you just delete and start over again?
I do the little backup to SD card in the Mark II, and then I've literally never gone back to a backup, so I might as well be throwing them away. But at least they're there in my brain. I haven't fully deleted them. So I would say one thing I'm really bad at. I've been making music for a long time. I think I've learned a lot of different techniques, and I've learned a lot of different ways to do things. But one thing I'm not great at is being patient enough to go back and work on older things, or try multiple techniques, or remember all the stuff that I know how to do. I'm not very patient, and I don't have a great memory, so I'm like very beholden to how I've been doing things lately, and I get in sort of phases, and I do things a certain way for a while, and then like I'll be reminded of something I was doing a long time ago and try to do that again. Kind of go in cycles that way.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had a really good memory and like I was way more patient and my attention span was longer, I feel like I'd be able to make a lot more of what I hear in my head. A lot of times my attention span is the main stumbling block.
We're very much alike in that regard, to be honest. It's like exactly how I feel.
What the hell are you doing?
What do you mean, like this stuff? Do you hear like additional instruments, or what is this hearing stuff in your head?
When people talk about being able to hear, I guess I don't hear like a specific instrument or a specific melody really in my head, but I have kind of a feeling, or like an aesthetic, I guess might not be the right word for sound, but I have kind of an image of the finished piece texturally in my brain, which I think is kind of a weird way to say it. And I'm kind of chasing that until I find something that meets up with what I'm thinking of, or something else that's interesting. But when people talk about being able to like hear a piece of music in their head and then recreate it, I've never been able to do that. I think that's amazing if people can actually do that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear music in your head?
Rarely. I can literally like count the instances on my one hand when it was like, I hear this melody, or I hear a specific thing that would fit. Obviously, I can't pull it up. So just like I'm happy I heard it.
Yeah. So, I always wonder too, and then is that if I hear something like that, am I just remembering somebody else's song that I heard? And like, how do you know that that's original? Or does it matter? I guess it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Now you said that you're quite comfortable with different flipping techniques and I guess arrangement techniques. Is there something that you're uncomfortable with? Like one thing that is hard to you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't want to sound overconfident. I wouldn't say I'm great at anything in particular. But there are definitely major holes. I don't have strong. Actually, just started taking piano lessons this year for the first time since I was 12. I think my theory is pretty weak. And I don't, some people have really good ears, and I don't think I have a very good ear. I think my mixes are pretty rough unless I do a lot of referencing. And I know a lot of people that just produce, they make a beat and the mix is always cleaner because their ears are a little bit better than mine. And then, I think ears, attention span, and music theory are my biggest areas of opportunity.
Oh, all right. Okay. Sounds fair enough. Keys is a major point I keep hearing a lot. It's interesting how beat makers still look for that space because it's skippable. If you ask me, with today's technology, you don't have to. The modern MPCs, DAWs, obviously, and so many boxes make it so much easier to, if you hit 3, you can do the rest, program it basically.
Yeah, and I definitely use a lot of those tools. But I always feel like I want to know why something works. So if I can press a button and all of the notes I play are going to be in key, that's really cool. But I'd like to also understand when I'm hearing samples. Sometimes I'll go and use a tool where you can pull MIDI out of something, Ableton or whatever, and take a song where there's a chord change or something that makes me blows my mind, makes me feel a certain way, and try to figure out why. And even when I pull the MIDI out and I can see exactly what chords they're playing or whatever, I don't theoretically understand why it feels and why it works. So I think when I talk about theory, that's something I'd like to work on, is being able to know the things that are really interesting and successful to me. Why are those things successful?
Yeah,
I'm a very long way from that level, obviously. But
What about darknesses?
that's why I feel so intimidated when guys in this session go "Oh, nice chord change," or "Oh, that's a change of keys." What
did I do a chord? Oh yeah, yeah. But I think that honestly, one of the coolest things about making music is just being able to learn. You basically never run out of things to learn, and there's so much. Especially now, it's very different than when I started. There's so much information out there, and so many people doing really interesting things. You can kind of just endlessly be inspired if you proactively looking for people that are doing cool stuff. One of the things that I love about how much music community there is online now is you can just reach out to people that make cool things and ask them about them. And I've done that a lot and had really positive responses from people. And it's really cool when someone's like, "Yeah, oh, here's what I was doing. Let me show you exactly what I was doing or why I was doing that." Because when I started making beats, number one, I didn't really know anybody else doing it, but also, all the techniques were closely guarded secrets, and nobody was sharing information. And it made it really fun when you did figure something out. It was you had to analyze videos that weren't supposed to show you anything and see if they accidentally exposed, some kind of technique or something like that. It was fun, but everyone was so bad. And, if you didn't have a connection to somebody who knew what they were doing, it took so long to learn. So I think it's really inspiring how much, you just have to want to get better and you have to work at it, and you're just going to keep getting, there's so much out there. You're just going to keep improving. So.
Absolutely. And
here's how.
Go ahead.
And so the way I always think about it, and I think this is the thing about making beats in particular that I think is the most engaging to me. When you first see, if you see a painting, if I see an amazing painting, I don't know anything about painting, and so I have not an inkling how somebody started to approach that and create that piece of art. I don't understand anything about the technique, so it might as well be magic to me. It was just an incredible picture. But then if I start taking a painting class and I learn different brush strokes and different types of techniques, you can start to recognize the techniques that people used to create that painting, and starts to kind of demystify it. And when you're looking at like, something from a master, obviously there's like layers and layers and layers of things to understand. But in music, it's the same thing. I think it's so cool when you start to kind of recognize the tool marks of the person that created something and understand how they did it, and then you can kind of peel back some of those layers, and something that seemed magical and like completely incomprehensible to starts to make sense, and you're like, oh, they were just doing this and this and this, and then you kind of you can figure out how to do things on your own and apply those to your own work. And that's like my favorite part of the whole music making process.
What you said previously, this forgetting what you did before, is actually what happens to me as well. It's like, do you have something that you recently started doing, but did like, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and then moved on and continued?
Yeah. So I think one thing that I did a long time ago and then stopped doing was that I used to, when I first started chopping samples, I didn't understand when people would take like 2 bars and chop on like 16th or 8th notes into even sections. I didn't know anybody was doing that. I didn't really know why you would do that. So I would always chop by like the length of notes in the piece. So if there was like a long piano note I would always chop that whole piano note. And it's a little different working that way because nothing lines up. You have to be a little bit more creative how you piece things back together. If you're playing, if you chop in 8th notes or whatever, if you play them back in 8th notes, they line up. So I used to always chop that way for years until I realized that it was a little bit simpler, depending on what your end goal was, to chop in like musical segments. But I started again recently chopping that way, just based off of like sounds that I was hearing in the music. And I've been really enjoying it. You kind of end up with some really interesting things. The other thing I've been doing is combining those two and essentially playing things, recording the MIDI data in a sequence in a predictable way, and then going back retroactively and chopping the samples in a out of sync way, and you get some kind of cool offbeat stuff that way. That's one thing I love about the new MPCs, is that I think they're basically the best in terms of chopping and manipulating samples. And I love copying a sequence and then changing all of the sample chops after the fact and moving things around and seeing kind of where things end up without touching the MIDI data at all.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting. That's actually dope.
I think I got that idea from, there was actually Stolen Drums. There was a video he did with, I think, Very Sick Beats, talking about adding swing to drums just by adding sound, the old technique, adding space to the beginning of drum sounds so they hit a little bit later. When you don't, even if everything's fully quantized, you can add a bunch of feel by moving the samples themselves around. But if you do that with like melodic chops, you can get some really interesting things as well.
This is so true, because I catch myself so often. This happens on MPCs specifically. I would just chop on the ones. Like, my brain is just like triggering in that way specifically. And I hate this because it's like a very predictable way. It doesn't introduce enough variation. So yeah, I would do things like I would take a range and then take 16 slices just to make sure that I have this swing, that it's not on the one. But what you just said is just like, you can also take it on the one and move them all around, basically. That's super interesting.
One of the things that's really fun, if you're doing stuff on like a pocket operator or something, it's really satisfying to get like weird, wonky, offbeat stuff on a machine that can't record off the grid. It kind of feels like you're breaking the rules a little bit in a way. So I think I'm very satisfied by succeeding despite the limitations of the machine. I guess that's a theme. But this is funny because I talked to, a bunch of the groups and communities I'm in have a bunch of younger artists in them. And if somebody was starting out, I would not suggest they get an SP or an MPC I think it just like it's really fun, but I think in a lot of ways it ends up being a hurdle to being creative. And if you just stick to one DAW, if I had the self-control and the patience to stick to one DAW for years, imagine how in depth you would get, or just, I guess, one piece of hardware if you just stuck with one piece. So the people that I see that just like spend years using one machine or one DAW making beat after beat, I have so much admiration for those people, because you get so deep on your craft if you are able to focus on one thing like that.
It's this double-sided sword, I guess, because
What?
Two sides of the same coin.
on the other hand, all those different machines, they have a specific workflow, or those limitations make you like challenge yourself in certain ways, which is just much harder. I honestly, I would never think of many things that were just introduced through other machines on the MPC, which is, as you said, it's just like so powerful. You can do whatever. It's just, we also, as lazy creatures, we tend to go a beaten way at some point, and it's really hard to challenge yourself in those environments if you don't know the shortcut, if you don't know how the other workflow works, so you can kind of transpose and take it over to like, oh yeah, I can also do this. You can, I don't know.
Yeah. You know what I did a few months ago? I was trying to make a bunch of beats on the 303, and I was getting really annoyed with how slow it was. And I tried to build an Ableton set that was just like limited in the same way that the 303 would be, because like all the stuff you're doing is really basic manipulation of samples. So you could do the same thing in an Ableton drum rack or whatever. And it was great, and I was having a blast and making a lot of beats, until I started thinking like, oh, and since I'm in Ableton, I can also do this other thing that you can't do on the 303, and I started adding other things, and then before long, my Ableton template, when I open it up, has too much stuff in it again, and I'm I don't have the same feel that I had when I was limiting myself more. So maybe that's one thing I really like about jumping around, is that you kind of try and recreate the workflow from another piece that is more limited, and try and figure out workarounds to use the same workflow in a different sampler.
You mentioned the big chain that is now in the templates. What's the oddest piece in there, or generally in your signal path? What's the?
And are you talking about in Ableton, or just
plugin or a gear? Like what is an unexpected thing that?
That's a good question. I basically don't have much in my Ableton template, so I don't have a good answer for that. I try and keep things pretty basic. I've been trying to add, I bought a Chaos pad right before they announced the really cool looking new ones, like literally the week before. So I've been adding that into my chain a little bit. There's some cool effects and things on there, and it's also got some interesting looping functions and stuff that I haven't messed with too much. I don't know if I have other unexpected pieces. I use my MPC-1 like basically just as a sound module at this point. It's kind of wasted, but
Akai won't be happy.
yeah. I love it. If it sounded better, I would use it more. I just don't like the way it sounds very much. And I wonder if I did like a blind sound test, would I be able to tell? I don't know, but I feel different when I use it. So.
And which thing is always present, like for years now?
The 303's been in as long as I had it, and as long as I've had it, which is a couple of years. And some other SP, but it's definitely the 303 is the one that has been at the very end of the chain ever since. Even if it's not affecting anything, just recording beats to a pad and then recording them back off, I feel like it changes the way things sound in a way that sounds like I want me to sound. So.
Do you take it into the DAW after that when you record to a pad? do you take it for another round of mastering, basically?
Yeah, I do, because well, ideally, I have somebody that actually knows how to master it. But if not, I'll run it through Ozone or whatever in the DAW, and try my best to hit whatever loudness thing I think is correct at the moment. I think that's one thing that I wish I had a better grasp on earlier on, is producing consistent sounds. I think a lot of the stuff I was doing even a year ago, my stuff is always super heavy on compression, but some of the stuff I listened to from a couple years ago is so over compressed that it's a little bit painful to listen to. And I think I would like those beats a lot if I had just processed them better on the way out. But you can't go back. You learn things as you go.
Now, you're releasing a tape every week this year, which is a feat.
This is my cat Loopy. I'm releasing a new beat tape every Tuesday through all of 2024.
How do you strip down? Because a tape a week is a lot.
I'm just refreshing my email to see if the tape that I submitted this weekend is going to be live in time. I guess I worked on, the different groups that I'm in. I'm not very good at collaborating with other people. I get really inspired by stuff that I'm interested in, and it's harder for me to, when I'm being creative, it's harder for me to like direct that in things that don't really 100% pique my interest. So it's a little frustrating to me sometimes to work with other people, with rappers and other artists. I would say it's not a strength of mine. And so I had a bunch of music that I'd made last year, and I had a cool idea, basically just to take pieces of that and pieces of new music and put out a ton of music this year that I have full control over, and I can put together in ways that I like and theme however I want it. And my original plan was to be really smart and plan it all out ahead. And, I had a lot of beats that were, done-ish, needed to be like cleaned up and sequenced. And I did that for 3 weeks, and then I've been getting really bored. So now I've been trying to make all new beats for the last few tapes, which is not smart, but it's a lot. It's really fun to just make things and put them out right away. And it's very satisfying to have like a deadline every week, basically. I've submitted the last few tapes at 9 p.m. on Saturday night to go live on the Tuesday at midnight. And this most recent one I submitted at 10 p.m. So maybe I might have found out where the line is. This one may not go live in time. We'll find out, I guess. But it's really, in terms of like being productive, it's really motivating to me to have this deadline that I've set for myself that I have to hit every week. And I find myself very creative under pressure. I don't know if it's like an ADHD thing, but if I have a very hard time being creative until I like absolutely need to be creative, and there's the pressure of a deadline coming up. And so it's like basically a way to do that every single week. It's been really fun and a little bit stressful, but let's see if I can make it the whole year.
Do you have a mitigation plan for occasions when sometimes, like as you mentioned earlier, like sometimes you get stuck in beats, or like you switch to a piece of gear that is not providing on that day? Having like such a hard deadline, you have to have some plan B or something that will help you out.
I made the first 3 tapes and then I scrapped them. So if I am completely without options, I'll go back and actually finish one of those 3. And then I was doing a thing with some friends. This is actually one of the things that gave me the idea to do this. I have a group of friends that all just talk about music stuff. And we've done an exercise a few times now where we just choose 10 samples that we all suggest, and then everybody makes 10 beats in a weekend. which is a lot, and it kind of sucks, and you have to like wake up early or stay up late to do it if you have other things going on in your life. But you can do it. You can make 10 beats in a weekend, and then if you put those things together in a tape, it's pretty cool to say like, oh, in 2 days or 3 days, I made, a finished product, and you don't have to put it out, but at least you have something to show for, instead of like endless project files that never go anywhere, things that you share with your friends on Discord, nobody else ever hears. I have a couple of friends that are so incredible, and only a few people ever hear the stuff that they make. Some things kind of filter out with artists eventually. But I just have a lot of people that I hear music from that I wish more of it was out there for other people to hear. And so I think everybody should just put out a ton of music. I know, some people want to curate things more, and I used to feel a little bit more that way. But you can always take things down after the fact if you wanted to. And I think it's really cool too to see progression. So you can, if you're an artist and there's an artist that you're a fan of, it's cool to see how their creative output changes over time. And I think audiences generally don't hold it against you if you've gotten better over the years. So personally, I'm in favor of people releasing more music, and it's so easy now. You didn't used to be able to do it like this, so.
You also mentioned just getting up early. Is this how you stay consistent in your output?
Yes, I think this is like a 35-year-old old man take. I think being creative first thing in the morning is very valuable. I think it depends a little bit on what your lifestyle is like. But waking up early in the morning is something you can always control. Unless you have obviously, something I can always control. If you have a late night job or different things in your life, waking up early might not be something that you have control over. But for me, waking up early in the morning is something I can control. The only thing stopping me from waking up early in the morning is willpower if I'm tired. And I can always get up and I can always work on stuff at the same time, and nothing can ever come up that gets in the way. If I try and work on stuff in the evening, family things or work things are going to come up and get in the way of that. But I have 100% control if I get up early in the morning, and if I need more time, I just get up earlier. And I find that to be the most consistent way that I can give myself time for creative endeavors, is just controlling that period. I usually get up at 4:30 or 5 in the morning and work for a couple hours before I have to wake everybody else up. And so I'm a strong advocate for waking up early. I know it doesn't work out for everybody, but.
Mm-hmm. But do you make sure that this is a daily thing, basically?
Yeah, depending. There are some days when it doesn't. If we have something to do late at night, I don't always do it. But during the week, definitely. But I have little kids, and they go to bed pretty early, and then I'm not a late night person anyway, so probably easier for me than it would be for some people.
It's very inspiring. I think Complete is in the same. He is an early bird as well.
Oh yeah,
she mentioned it that she likes to get up before the kids to put in some work in the studio.
I think I have a lot of friends that make music really late at night, and I'm sure that works well for them, but I can't. I'm not a late night person, so when my brain is tired, I find myself a lot less effective creatively. But in the beginning of the day, everything's fresh. You have to grab a cup of coffee, and nothing has happened yet in the day that can affect your mood, so you can chase whatever feeling creatively that you're chasing, and you're not tired or bummed out because of work or whatever else going on in your life. You can create whatever feeling you want, and hopefully that influences the rest of your day too.
Mm-hmm. This is definitely an interesting. I'm a late person, but I attest to this to the mood, because it's definitely true that before shit happens, It's up to you where you take stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that I'm very much affected by things like in terms of music, but definitely like if my brain is too busy on a task already, it's just harder to detach yourself and get into like a fully creative mode. It becomes like I'm distracted much faster. So that's, yeah, definitely something to consider, switching to the early mode.
Well, whatever works for different people. That's what works for me.
How do you get inspired do you even need inspiration?
I don't know. All over a lot of my inspiration honestly comes from spending time around people that are making interesting things that I want to steal little bits of knowledge from. And if somebody sends me something that they made that's cool, they're doing something that I haven't done before, then I'm going to try and see, filter that through my process and see what I can make out of that. Or, I don't know, there's inspiration everywhere. Movies, cool visual stuff. I went to school for digital art, and my day job is in communications and design stuff. So I'm very visually inspired as well. And I think it's really nice to be able to draw inspiration from things that are not like directly other pieces of music, because there's no fear that you're taking too much from those things. When I talk about chasing a feeling, a lot of times it's very nebulous feeling, but you kind of have a thing driving you to create, and then you follow it where it goes, I guess.
That's interesting. How do you translate the inspiration in the visual domain into your music domain?
I don't know how. I guess if you take a still, this is actually something I really like doing. If you take a still from a movie that you really like, one of my favorite movies is the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix.
I feel really close to her. Like when I talk to her, I feel like she's with me.
Because it's visually a beautiful movie. And it has this really it's futuristic, but it's kind of nostalgic. It's like really bleak, but it's also kind of warm and cozy. And if you look at stills from that movie, they feel a certain way, even though it's just one still image. And I think that you can kind of hold that feeling in your brain and try and make sounds that remind you of that. And I don't know how the connection between those two things really works, and probably works differently for different people. But that's kind of how I approach it. I'm trying to hold a feeling from some other source in my brain, and then holding things up against that and seeing if they match.
This blows my mind.
Well, how is it for you?
You have choices.
I'm very driven by the source material. Like, this is probably the major inspiration source. So I listen to something and then I see if I can grab some of the emotions that are like in that thing.
Yeah.
It's so much plainer. But
that sounds the same though. You're just drawing on the feeling from the other. You can get feelings from anywhere. That's one thing I really like to draw, a parallel to beat making. I really love about working with SPs and some older hardware is that I got into this thing where I was sending music to artists and we're making songs and stuff, and I was always worried about preserving my stems and so that we could go back later and fix up the mixes. And I found that it was really impacting my creative process, and it was hard to commit to things because I wanted to always preserve my ability to later go back and change things. And working with older pieces, and SPs in particular, you just can't do that most of the time. And you just have to be okay working destructively, which is really freeing because you find, you filter your snare and you find where you like it, and then you resample it and it's locked in. And you can't, you need pad space, so you might have to delete that pad later. So you can't go back and fix your snare sound after the fact. And I made a very deliberate change when I was sending music out to people to start saying, I can't get stems for most of these, so they sound how they sound. And I found like a lot more music came out of that without having to worry about being able to retroactively work backwards. So that was very freeing to me. I think it's really hard to do that in other parts of life, but and that's one of the things about putting out music every week is it is what it is. You know, every tape so far, there are things that when I listen, I would do differently, but it doesn't matter. It's out there, and now I can do it differently on the next one, and make new mistakes that I can learn from. It's a very rewarding process in that way, learning to let go of things and put them out there.
You said you would look for effects on vinyl as well, just to have them. Like, what are the weirdest samples in your collection?
So one thing about my record collection is it's like 90% dollar bin records. And so I don't have anything like rare or hard to find. But I have a lot of really strange spoken word and children's, anything that looks weird like that. I try and find, there's a lot of local like news station recordings and stuff that you can find for 50 cents, or at least you used to be. Even the dollar bin records are more expensive now, which sucks. But I don't know if I have a specific thing that's the weirdest. I've got a bunch of local news station ones that are like Sesame Street, kids shows, things like that. And most of the time, there's like nothing good on those, and it's a waste of time going through them. But every once in a while, you find something really cool and specific, and probably nobody else has used it before, which is a cool feeling. So, yeah. Or there's a weird genre of like personal motivation or like self-improvement records that have like synth soundtracks in the background, and I've found some really interesting things on those types of records. I don't know who was composing the synth parts to put behind the personal affirmations records, but some of them were pretty crazy.
I think the weirdest thing in mine is actually, because you mentioned children's records. It is a children's. It's actually an old Russian story, but an East German recording from the 70s. Okay. It's massively chauvinistic. This is where it starts. So my wife hated it, like on the needle drop, and then there is a section. Out of context, you would say this is bondage porn, because she gets wiped with iron bars, but it sounds like a whip. She makes all those noises. It's like every time I play back that to somebody, it's like, what is the story about again? How is it a children's story?
So that's what I think is so interesting about vinyl, is like there's so much really weird, unique stuff, and it was like a lot more work to get things pressed to vinyl. I mean, it's not easy now, but and it's still there. We're going to lose so much of the recorded sound now that's all just stored digitally or on CDs as CDs break down. I don't think people are going to be able to, depending on what happens with the internet, it's going to be harder to go back in 30 years and hear things that people were recording in their homes. Oh, maybe with the internet it will be easier. But the coolest thing about vinyl is the history and the weird stuff that people were able to preserve on records, despite the technological challenges of that.
What would you say is very overrated in the beat making process?
I have a lot of issues with I have a lot of old man complaints about the way that things are done. I think the way that the internet has changed beat making has a lot of really positive things. There's a lot of really talented people making really interesting and unique music. But I hear so many people that kind of learn from the same tutorials and use the same drum sounds and use the same plugins that they see in a YouTube video. There's a lot of people making really similar music, and I understand both sides of the whole type beat thing. But I'm not sure that it's great if your goal is unique and creative and interesting music. And, you know, we're all products of our inspirations. But I'm not sure that everybody is working towards becoming a unique artist. And that's fine if that's not your goal. But from my personal perspective, there's a lot of music that it doesn't interest me these days. And I think my biggest personal challenge with doing all this music stuff online is that you have to be both like a personality and an influencer and a musician. And I just want to make beats in my room and play them for people that I like. I don't really want to be a social media person, and I don't even really want to play music in front of people. You know, I'm trying to do that a little bit more here and there. I wish though that you could those things were a little bit more separate, that people didn't have to get on and say, and I've done this just like everybody else. Here's my top 5 reasons to use this beat making technique or whatever. Here's 3 things the Alchemist does that you need to start doing today. Like, I think that stuff is so lame. But, you know, I also understand you have to do what you have to do to get, to fight the algorithm to get people to hear your music in the first place. So I have no issue with anybody playing the game. I'm just going to complain about it in my room over here. Nobody's listening.
Fair enough. And underrated? What would you say is hugely underrated?
I think everybody should turn off quantize. And you can turn it back on again when you're comfortable not using it. I think it has really strong use in certain places. But my first response when people that are just starting out send me stuff is almost always just just turn it off. It's a lot, it's okay if you have to replay something a few times. But you get a better understanding of how things are supposed to sound if everything is not being filtered through the grid. And so I think non-quantized is underrated. Mm-hmm. Playing things freely,
which isn't difficult with any type of gear. Now that I'm thinking, is it maybe an obstacle somewhere?
I will say I think it's more of a problem for people that are making beats in DAWs, because then you have to figure out the whole latency thing with your MIDI controller, and if you don't have a great computer, you could be dealing with enough milliseconds of latency that it's much more difficult to play things live. So you can quantize if that's your issue, and also you can quantize regardless. Why nobody needs to listen to me.
Did you have a change in views, a big shift, something that changed your mind in your approach?
I think I changed a lot. I think one thing that I am very good at is I think I'm really good at understanding different approaches, or at least that's what a conceited thing to say. I'm very interested in understanding different approaches, and I think I do a pretty good job of trying to appropriate other people's techniques in a way that works with my workflow. So I think I pretty regularly change and then kind of keep pieces of things I've dramatically simplified my music in the last maybe 2 years, and as I became more proficient, I was learning that I could just kind of keep adding layers and layers onto my music. And at some point I realized that just adding more complexity isn't always making things better. And obviously there's a point of when things start getting worse. And somebody that I listen to a lot, Sam I Am, if you listen to, there are people that are so good at doing so much with only a few little pieces, and they curate those pieces really carefully, and they're arranged very carefully. I really admire that approach, so I've been moving slowly in that direction. I still add a ton of unnecessary stuff probably, and I'd say my beats are very messy, but I think I've moved in that direction quite a bit.
It's difficult. It's actually like, it's really difficult to reduce stuff.
I think it's harder than going. It's like in school when they would ask you to write a paper, and when you're 10 years old and they ask you to write a paper, you're like, I have to write 5 pages. That's so much. It's hard to write 5 pages. And then you get a little bit older and you have to write 5 pages, and you're like, how am I going to fit all this stuff into 5 pages? It's way harder to keep things concise. It's kind of the same thing. If you have fewer elements, there's a lot more attention on any one of the elements, and they have to be, used appropriately and conceived and processed in the right way, or else things won't sound good. So definitely more difficult that way.
Do you change lanes sometimes? Like leave entirely, I don't know, do odd time signatures, or use just synthesizers, some sort of like a complete shift in the approach?
Yeah, I do. So I kind of alternate between sampled and non-sampled stuff. But the non-sampled stuff I approach kind of the same way, where I'm playing stuff and then sampling it into the SP, and then chopping it up like samples. And then I did go through a period, I guess last year, where I was making a bunch of odd time signature beats that hurt my brain, and I was doing that with some friends, and it was really, really fun to share stuff, and try and figure out, without a strong theory background, try and figure out what actual time signature stuff was in. So I try and follow things so something like that. We're making odd time signature stuff for a few weeks, or trying to make 10 beats in a weekend. I do a lot of kind of dumb, extreme personal challenges like that, because I feel like it's just the same thing of creating obstacles that you have to be creative to get around, and you end up with a lot of really dumb results, and you end up with some really cool results. And then the next time you're encounter a similar challenge, you have some different solutions to it. So.
And what was the weirdest or the craziest self-challenge, would you say?
I don't have good answers to any of these. I told you I have a bad memory. I tried to use the same snare for a long period of time, and I threw away a lot of those beats because the snare wasn't a good fit. But I had this idea for a while that if I use the same drum sounds constantly, it'll be like a signature sound, and it'll be very recognizable. And it just ended up sounding like a lot of versions of the same beat, and some were better and some were worse. So I scrapped that idea after a little bit, but I was sure that was going to be my ticket to critical acclaim, was using the same snare drum over and over again.
What was the most successful move to critical acclaim, would you say?
I don't think I've any success in critical acclaim. I don't know. I think it's a more gradual thing. If I compare myself to a year ago or 2 years ago, I think I've learned a lot of things, and I would say that the music I'm making is a lot better than it was a couple years ago. But I think it's just like little pieces from all of this kind of stuff. And the real value of doing weird things like that, for me personally, is just staying super inspired and motivated. Because it's like anything else. You just got to keep showing up. Which, by the way, is the name of the tape that I'm putting out on Tuesday. So, yeah, it's just iteration, just putting in the reps. And if you can find little tricks to get yourself to be, excited and motivated while you're doing that, that's very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Is it like keep showing up is definitely a great advice. Do you have a favorite piece of advice that is sitting like in the back of your head constantly reminding you and inspiring you?
So my dad was a professional, you never know what to look at me. My dad was a professional distance runner. It's like an Olympic caliber long distance runner. And I'm 6'2", 300 plus pounds. So I'm like, if you met me, you would not believe me that my dad was a professional distance athlete. But when he was in like high school or something, he was competing with some guys that were always beating him. And he was talking to his mom about how he can figure out how to keep up with these guys and beat him. And his mom, who was a psychiatrist at the time, basically said, why are you worried about keeping up with them? Why don't you make them keep up with you? Which is like kind of dumb advice, but also genius, because so many situations that we're in life, we create these obstacles just based on our mindset. And like I had a thing recently that I was having a bunch of anxiety about, and I just decided at some point that I'm not going to be anxious about this anymore. I'm going to make it a really fun thing, and I'm going to have a great time. And it kind of works. You can basically think your way through most of the obstacles that we have. That's a huge oversimplification, but you can change your experience of things. And I think Stoicism has some connections to this. You can really change how you experience the things that happen. You can't control the things that happen, but you can change the way that you experience them. And I think that extends to everything. So I try and think about that when I am mindful enough to obviously it's easier to say that than to actually remember it in the moment. But that's my favorite piece of advice that my dad ever gave me. My dad also always used to tell me to only believe the things he said that were true. So I'm still trying to figure out which ones to believe. But
no, the funeral question: who would play your funeral if you had like a dead or alive people showing up to your funeral?
Oh God. I don't listen to that much music. I don't know if that's a weird confession to make. I've always been a huge... Okay, my favorite rapper, I'm not saying he's the greatest rapper, my favorite rapper of all time is Cormega.
I paint elaborate on paper, immaculate.
Because I constantly, when I listen to his music, find that he words things in a way that I understand, but I never expect. And I'm constantly like figuring out, that's a really interesting way to say that. So I'd love to have Cormega play my funeral. And then I would love to have I don't know if I have another great answer for that. I would love to have a friend of mine play at my funeral. My friend Ager, I think, is a really talented beat maker, and someday people will know a little bit more about him, but I would like him to play my funeral as well.
One last, the craziest story you would like to leave people about you or that happened to you?
I used to have a band in college, and we were called Fat Beard, and we used to mess around with a bunch of different creative recording techniques. And one afternoon we spent 2 or 3 hours trying to figure out different ways to mic up a guitar, and eventually ended up running a mic down the neck of this guitar, and it was inside the body of this acoustic guitar. And somebody came in and was like, you guys just created like a terrible electric guitar. And it was such a dumb idea, but it was so fun. So I think that's kind of maybe a microcosm of my entire creative process, is finding stupid and inefficient ways to arrive at odd solutions.
Places. Yeah, that's great. Gotta try this out.
Could have been genius. It wasn't genius, but it could have been.
All right. Oh, family, I thank you so much for these nuggets and gems. I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you for letting me pick your brain.
No, thanks. It was a great
Appreciate
conversation. And stay tuned for my tutorial YouTube channel that I'm putting out. New gear, game changer gear reviews.
Yeah, I'll send you some AI generation tools for the thumbnails of ugly faces. All right, family. Again, thank you very
so
much. And I'll see you on Discord.
Okay, talk to you later.
Peace.